Okay, model for my camera. Model for the camera. There we go. There we go. Work the camera. Catwalk. Uh-oh. Turn it out.
You're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Well, as we all know, as aggressively as Gennady Golovkin has been trying to get Canelo Alvarez in the ring, it looks like that fight is not going to happen. And it just may never happen. Who knows? It all depends on, once again, how Golovkin looks in the future, because as far as I'm concerned, as long as Golovkin keeps knocking out the Dominic Wades, the Willie Monroes, or even the Chris Eubanks, I don't think Canelo Alvarez will ever get in the ring with Gennady Golovkin. But we know for sure he's not getting in the ring with Gennady Golovkin this year. We pretty much already know that. Now some writers and fans are already trying to attribute the reason why Canelo won't fight Golovkin now is because of the lawsuit he's dealing with when it comes to his former promoter that's suing him and Oscar De La Hoya. But that has nothing to do with Canelo not fighting against Golovkin next, because we know that Canelo, he's going to keep fighting regardless of this lawsuit. So with Canelo out of the runnings, you have a lot of fighters that have been calling out Gennady Golovkin recently. And one of those fighters is from the UK, and that is Chris Eubanks Jr. Chris Eubanks Jr., he's been aggressively calling out Golovkin. He has a lot of confidence that he can beat Golovkin, regardless if we believe it or not, which is the same thing that Eddie Hearn said, which is Chris Eubanks' promoter. But regardless if we believe it or not, Chris Eubank and his dad, they have a lot of confidence that they can beat Gennady Golovkin. So they're actually in negotiations as we speak right now for a fight against Golovkin in August or September. It's looking like Chris Eubank is most likely Golovkin's next opponent, because Gilberto Ramirez, another fighter, the super middleweight champion, which is a much bigger fight and a bigger challenge for Golovkin, I believe. But Gilberto Ramirez, he's unavailable because he already has an obligation to defend his title on Terrence Crawford's undercard, the Terrence Crawford versus Victor Postal fight. So Ramirez will be tied up until he takes care of that business. Then you have Danny Jacobs. That would have been another good fight, and that would have been a much bigger fight than Chris Eubanks. But Danny Jacobs, he's not interested in fighting Golovkin right now. In fact, I believe Danny Jacobs, he's actually negotiating the Sergio Mora rematch right now. But according to Team Golovkin, eventually Danny Jacobs, he's going to be in the same situation that Canelo Alvarez was in, because Danny Jacobs, he does hold the WBA belt. Eventually, they're going to order him to either fight Gennady Golovkin or give up the belt, according to Team Golovkin, that is. So that's why we didn't get those fights. So that's not Golovkin's fault that we're not getting those fights, even though those fights are bigger than Chris Eubanks. But it is Gennady Golovkin's fault that we didn't get, or we're not going to get, a Golovkin versus Erislandy Lara fight next, which is another fight that's bigger than the Chris Eubanks fight. Now, me personally, I like the Chris Eubanks fight. I think it's a good fight for Gennady Golovkin. I mean, even though I believe that Golovkin, he wins that fight, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that fight would play out probably later on in this video, or I might just do a separate video depending on how long I talk about this situation. But regardless of who I believe will win that fight, I think it's a good fight. Even if Golovkin goes in that fight as a strong favorite, I think it's a good fight. I think it's a much better fight than Golovkin versus Monroe, Rubio, Adama, Dominic Wade. Chris Eubank, he has a name, he has the confidence of a young, hungry fighter. And not only that, but Chris Eubanks is one of the very rare fighters that is actually going into this fight pursuing a Golovkin fight. He's one of the few fighters that actually has the confidence that he can beat Gennady Golovkin. Regardless if it's true or not, he has the confidence and he believes in himself. He believes that he can beat Gennady Golovkin. There's only been one other fighter that I could think of, at least, that actually went in the ring with an enormous amount of confidence that they can beat Gennady Golovkin, and that was Curtis Stevens. And to this day, Team Golovkin, they admit that Curtis Stevens was one of their most difficult fights to win. Of course, outside of the Kassim Ouma fight, because of the Kassim Ouma fight, Kassim was actually beating Gennady Golovkin going all the way into the championship rounds. And I believe somewhere around the championship rounds, Gennady Golovkin, he ended up catching Kassim Ouma and stopping him at the last minute. Now, Curtis Stevens, he didn't do as well as Kassim Ouma did against Gennady Golovkin, but Curtis Stevens, he was able to back up Golovkin. He was able to make Golovkin a little uncomfortable. And what was funny is Curtis Stevens was, if you really think about it, his situation was very analogous to, Willie Monroe's situation. Because both Curtis Stevens and Willie Monroe, they both did better after they got knocked down. After they got hurt real bad, it's like that woke them up and they both did better after that. So with that all being said, once again, Curtis Stevens, he did really good against Gennady Golovkin. And once again, Curtis Stevens, he was the last fighter to have an enormous amount of confidence that he could beat Gennady Golovkin. Now you have Chris Eubank Jr., who also believes that he can beat Gennady Golovkin. So like I said before, I like the Golovkin versus Chris Eubanks fight, but I believe Golovkin should be fighting Edeslani Lara. Edeslani Lara, he has a big enough name. Edeslani Lara, he's already fought on pay-per-view. Matter of fact, Edeslani Lara, his pay-per-view numbers against Canelo did better numbers than Golovkin versus Lemieux. Matter of fact, they did twice the amount of numbers on pay-per-view. Okay? Edeslani Lara, he already gets paid about $1 million a fight. So he already makes money. Edeslani Lara would be the biggest name on Golovkin's resume, and probably would be the best fighter on Golovkin's resume in terms of amateur pedigree and accomplishments as a pro. Okay? Edeslani Lara, he arguably beat Canelo Alvarez. He arguably beat Paul Williams. He has some really good wins on his resume. He just beat Vanes Manarosian, a fighter that Canelo Alvarez won't even go close to, which that would be another good step up, a good fight for Canelo Alvarez. Vanes Manarosian, he's been calling out Canelo for years. So I believe that Golovkin, he should be fighting against Edeslani Lara, since he's not fighting Canelo Alvarez next. Now, even though Chris Eubank is going in this fight as an underdog, there's no doubt about it, Chris Eubank, he does have a chance. One of the main things Chris Eubank would have to avoid is backing up to the ropes and just backing up in general. Because I was looking at his fight against Blackwell the other day, and I noticed even though he was beating the shit out of Blackwell, there were a lot of rounds where he was still allowing Blackwell to basically back him up. And if he does that against Gennady Golovkin, he's getting knocked out. Because Gennady Golovkin is at his best when he's backing you up or when he has you on the ropes. To beat Gennady Golovkin, you have to back him up. You have to pin him to the ropes. because the majority of aggressive fighters, they are not comfortable fighting on their back foot. This is the reason why when you see super special effect type of slick fighters like Floyd Mayweather, Roy Jones Jr., if you notice, they don't mind having their back against the ropes. And you guys have to understand something. Having your back against the ropes is being held at a disadvantage. That's the reason why even when people aren't talking about boxing and they're just conversating, they use that analogy, my back is against the ropes, because that means you are at a disadvantage. So you have special fighters that can be at a disadvantage, and they could turn that disadvantage into an advantage, right? But if you notice, if you look at the history of boxing, you'll notice aggressive fighters seldomly feel comfortable with their back against the ropes. I mean, you look at Mike Tyson, you look at Julio Cesar Chavez, you look at Joe Frazier, you look at all of the aggressive fighters, Antonio Margarito, none of those fighters were ever comfortable with their back against the ropes. In fact, it is quite the contrary, because now that I think about it, Antonio Margarito and Mike Tyson, they both got knocked out while their back was against the ropes. Okay? That just goes to show you how uncomfortable they are with their back against the ropes and backing up, period. So this is the way you would beat someone like a Gennady Golovkin. You would have to smother him like a Andre Ward would do, like a Bernard Hopkins would do. Not saying Bernard Hopkins would beat him. Bernard is 50 plus years old. But I believe the young Bernard Hopkins, I believe, at least his type of young, the alien young Bernard Hopkins, when he was around 40 or 45 or even younger, I believe he would have beat Gennady Golovkin. But Andre Ward, we all know Andre Ward would beat Gennady Golovkin. And once again, he would do it the exact way I'm telling you would have to do it, which is back him up. Now, there's no doubt about it. You can incorporate some lateral movement in there, but you have to get Golovkin's respect by backing him up, by fighting him on the inside. As strong and as aggressive as Gennady Golovkin is, believe it or not, Golovkin is not an inside fighter. He is a mid-range hooker. That's what he is. He needs range and distance to land those hooks. This is the reason why when fighters like Willie Monroe got kind of close to him, he looked a little uncomfortable. This is why times when Curtis Stevens was backing up Golovkin, he looked a little uncomfortable. But you guys have to understand something. Curtis Stevens and Willie Monroe, or at least Curtis Stevens at the time, they were not elite fighters. Curtis Stevens is a good fighter, but let's be honest, Curtis Stevens, he did lose to Jesse Brinkley from The Contender, and you can't hold it against him that he lost to Andre Durrell. That's an acceptable loss right there. But the point is, if Curtis Stevens, if Willie Monroe, especially Willie Monroe, if he was able to slightly expose Gennady Golovkin in the trenches, you can imagine what a young fighter with power, agility, rhythm, ring generalship, amateur pedigree, what that fighter would be able to do against Gennady Golovkin when it comes to backing Golovkin up. Now, when it comes to Chris Eubanks, like I said, he has a chance, but he's going to have to avoid backing up by all means necessary. I truly believe there's another fighter out there, another middleweight fighter out there that would probably have an even better chance than Chris Eubanks of beating Gennady Golovkin. And that is Aventel Kurzitse. I know a lot of people, because a lot of people don't know who he is, a lot of people, they would automatically write him off. But I would really like to see how Golovkin would deal with that amount of pressure. I still believe there's another fighter, Toriano Johnson. I believe Toriano Johnson and Kurzitse, I believe both of those fighters would be Golovkin's toughest fights in the middleweight division right now. But we'll see. Because one thing I will say about the Chris Eubanks versus Blackwell fight, later on, Chris Eubanks, he did start pushing Blackwell back, and he backed him up to the ropes, and he started beating the shit out of him with body shots and uppercuts. And finally, the referee stopped the fight, or the doctor stopped the fight. So he has it in him, and that's what he's going to have to do against someone like Gennady Golovkin. I know that Chris Eubank, he likes to close the gap by leaning his left shoulder on your body. That way he could close the distance, get close enough to you to start landing body shots and uppercuts. And he'll also get combinations off, and he'll tie you up every now and then. I think that would be very effective against a Gennady Golovkin. Once again, it's actually better to be closer to Golovkin than be further away from him. Because then Golovkin, he gets full extension on his punches when you're moving away from him. If you stay real close to him, you smother a lot of those big ass hooks and uppercuts and overhand rights. So that's all I got for now. I'm on to the next one.
Okay. Hi. No, I got.
Just do it. When you do it.
Hi. You're watching Dante's Boxing Nation. No.
That was good.
Again,
That was close. Yeah.
Slow.
You know,
Close?
You gotta start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dante, but you have an accent. That's fine. But it's
have accent.
Dante with an A.
Dante's.
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 Boxing Nation. Dante.
Yeah.
It's just like she's gonna do
See,
it.
let me see.
Alright, Dante.
Let me see you say it. Can you say it?
Okay.
All right.
Hi, you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Yeah.